we are beginning with our session, which would be around navigating the speed bumps on India's clean power journey. That's the topic, and this session has been powered by Bloomberg NEF. May I request you all to kindly join me as I invite our moderator and our panelist on the session. May I invite on stage moderator, Specialist Solar Renewable Financing Bloomberg NEF, Mr. Rohit Gadre. Very warm welcome to you. May I also invite on stage COO MV Solar, Mr. Rohit Dhar. May I request Mr. Rohit Dhar to kindly join us onto the stage. And may I now invite Senior EVP and Head of Industry Analytics, Thematic Research and Policy Advisory, HDFC Bank, Mr. Sudeep Sural. May I request Mr. Sudeep to kindly join us onto the stage. I also invite on stage India CEO, Bright Night Power, Mr. Naveen Khandelwal. Warm welcome to you, sir. May we also invite on stage CEO, Vori Energies, Mr. Amit Baithankar. Warm welcome to you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, India's clean power sector has faced several challenges over the last year, ranging from policy uncertainty to macroeconomic headwinds. Yet installations are rising and domestic manufacturing is on rise. How can companies prepare themselves for the next stage of growth? To what extent should they diversify? And how do they navigate the shifting global landscape? This is what we are going to discuss on. This is the backdrop of our discussion. With those words, may I request the moderator of the session to kindly take over. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for all the panelists for being here. This is a very wide topic, and we are trying to cover sort of three broad themes here. What I want to do is I want to talk of first the financing aspect of it, both on the project side, on the supply chain side. We'll then move on to talk of projects, again, projects meaning not just power projects, but also manufacturing projects, what's happening there. And then finally, we'll talk of the supply chain, because I think that's an increasingly important piece of the puzzle that India is trying to solve in different ways. I want to start first with Mr. Amit from Waaree. This year, we have seen, by my count, at least 5 solar manufacturers complete their public listing. And there are several other IPOs in the wings. So what explains the popularity of IPOs among Indian manufacturers this year? Because there are a number of other options also available to raise equity.
We love IPOs, we love money, we love the sound taste and the possibility of growth of money. Jokes apart, I think this is IPO season, and India overall is doing well in IPOs, and it's across sectors. Particularly energy is a sector where, India obviously is an energy-hungry country. And any company which is having its stake in the new energy area will have a lot of interest. Government, of course, has also created a policy climate and infrastructure where the growth of these organizations are catalyzed. And so investors are clearly looking at the potential upsides that this sector can offer, and there honestly are substantial upsides. And I guess that's the reason why you'll see, so one of the IPOs that has, of our industry peer, has been a blockbuster success. And there is a voracious appetite for that kind of investment.
Actually, in terms of blockbuster success, actually, all 5 IPOs a week after listing, they were up at least 1.5 times, if not more. Subscription rates have been through the roof. But it's very interesting. We'll come back to this thing that you mentioned on how the government has created a sort of very positive climate around its policies for infrastructure. We'll come back to that. I want to turn to Naveenji next. 2-3 years ago, when we used to speak to investors and IPPs, investors were most worried about 2 things. One was the threat of PPA renegotiation, one was the threat of payment delays. Now, both these issues seem to have receded into the background a little bit. For greenfield projects today, what are the 1 or 2 top risks that investment committees are worried about? And how do IPPs mitigate these risks?
Sure, Rohit. So I think PPA renegotiation is a very, very difficult topic, but I think we are first waiting for the original PPA to be signed. We'll renegotiate later. So let them sign the first PPA, because the jokes apart, the situation is the supply of tenders has been very good in last few quarters across board, be it plain vanilla tenders of solar or wind or even hybrid, or the more complex ones where we operate significantly, which is FDRE and RTC. Supply of tenders is good, but I think conversion to PPA has taken some time, which is understandable also partially, but I think now the pipeline is becoming bigger and bigger. So I think that's one aspect. So we would expect those PPAs to be signed as soon as possible, because people like us or developers like us are actually ready to start construction of the projects. We have done our development work. There are lenders who are ready to disburse money. Every part of the project execution is ready. We just need a signed copy of the PPA. So that's one comment. Second, but to your larger point, have there been any concerns around PPAs, bankability of PPAs, or renegotiations? I don't think that's a concern at all in the minds of investors. That used to be the case 3, 4, 5 years back, when there were certain states which were trying to kind of give wrong signals, but nothing at the federal level. The intermediation by central government through 4 REIAs now in parallel, right? SECI, NTPC, as we all know, NHPC and SJVNL. I think bankability of PPA is very good. Project finance for renewable PPAs has always been improving in this market, but if you look at last 3, 4 years, more and more global lenders are getting more and more comfortable. You look at last 5, 6, 7 financings, the share of international lenders is only going up. So most of them are getting comfortable with the quality of the PPA or the bankability of the PPA. So that's on your first part. Now your second part, which is more important, is what are the 3, 4 things which are being discussed in IC rooms or board rooms. I think one is development timelines, right? Now development timelines have at least 3 aspects, if not more. One is land delivery in time, second is evacuation availability in time, and third is getting right equipment with right quality and right cost, right, with right counterparties. So land, as we all know, has been taking time. Some developers like us have been investing into land or investing that time also apart from capital, and there have been good success. So land is always there as one of the discussion items in ICs. Evacuation is becoming the new constraint now for last few years, especially last 2, 3 years. So that's another consideration. And third one, as I mentioned, is the getting equipment in time, in cost. Now the supply chain thing, I think, is becoming very, very volatile, because apart from demand supply caused price variations, which is one part of the story, the other part is the non-tariff barriers and so on. Various other factors, including that, I think are becoming very important discussion in the boardrooms. And the last piece, which is not for, let's say, plain solar tenders, but for complex renewable projects developers like us, is the integration of all the technologies together.
We'll come back to that integration question.
Okay,
Because
we'll
I think that's a topic in itself.
Yeah.
But it's interesting you mentioned supply chain and what sort of risks are coming. And it's great that we have 2 manufacturers also. So we'll try to get some views on how policy is changing and how are people thinking through what will happen over the next 2, 3 years. I'll turn to Sudeep ji next. Standalone wind, standalone solar financing has been sort of very commonly happening for all different sorts of players for well over a decade now. It's sort of well understood across the industry how project finance would work. We now have these kind of complex auctions where you have very different combinations of wind, solar, and storage, and no 2 projects or no 2 auctions are the same. In that sense, then, as a lender, how is the lending different, or what sort of assessment is different for a complex project compared to, say, a standalone solar project?
Yeah, I think that's a very relevant question. Our view is that increasingly you will see more and more complex tenders, and the days of, I think, plain vanilla solar and wind seem to be over. So when you look at complex tenders, obviously, there's a lot of oversizing because you have to meet what is required by the DISCOM, and that, as you rightly point out, is no 2 tenders are similar. Because there is oversizing and the capital cost per megawatt is very high, obviously these, the risks are therefore higher, and therefore, they have to be analyzed in a very different way. When you just break it up into parts, into solar, wind, and storage, solar is now pretty much, running business as usual. There is no problem. Wind is where many of the lenders have seen that whatever has been projected in terms of the, actual generation, it is very different from what suppliers have actually projected, right? So there is volatility throughout the year. There is volatility across years, and therefore, it is very important to have data which points to how much of the right sizing of wind should go into the capacities. So that we believe is a major area of analysis. The second area of analysis is in all these tenders, you would have seen there is, depending on the tender, there is a certain exposure to the merchant market. And as you are aware, merchant markets in India are not deep. So are you able to sell power at a particular time of the day, and you're actually projecting for 25 years. So it becomes very, very important to have a view on merchant market. And therefore, in that context, one of the things that could possibly help, because there is so little of depth in the merchant market, is that if there is, from the government side or from, policymakers side, different structures could be explored in order to give a certain amount of certainty when you're looking at, the merchant exposures. These are the
Something like
two
a
areas.
CFD, is it?
Sorry?
Is it something like a CFD?
Something like a CFD, or various other structures could be there. These are the, major areas where, things could go wrong, because, at the end of the day, while your ROEs are better than plain vanilla, but, the variability is far higher. The rupees crore per megawatt is higher. And therefore, complexity comes in myriad ways.
You mentioned oversizing, and I'll go back to Naveenji on this one now, because you had also mentioned on how projects are getting complex, and Sudeepji mentioned oversizing. Now, like he said, on oversizing, there is always a trade-off between the increased capital cost, the increased land requirement, getting the grid access, but you also have to balance sort of the certainty of supply and avoiding the penalties, etc. So what are the major considerations that go into making the exact sizing decision between all the different components? How does one come to say, yes, I will build X megawatts of solar, Y wind, or batteries? How does that process work?
Sure, right. So, sure. This is a very interesting question, and I think there are no right or absolutely correct one answer, right? Basically, all of us are trying to solve an optimization problem, which could have multiple algorithms and multiple outcomes. Now, yes, one could be a little bit more efficient or optimized from one perspective, but that could be the case from other perspective as well. But coming to the main point, I think it starts with the load curve requirement or the tender requirement or even the counterparty, whosoever it is. It could be even corporate. Yeah. What do they need now? And then it starts with what are the technologies which are going to make it doable. Now, third thing is, of course, capex optimization is one part of it. But I think once you narrow down your choices in terms of either it is only solar plus battery or solar plus wind plus battery or in whatever ratio, next discussion item in the IC room says the risk of or the certainty of that load getting, that shape getting met. So, as Mr. Sleeve was mentioning that people have different experience with wind versus solar, limited experience with batteries. So even that gets taken into account while teams propose that let's do these many megawatts of wind versus these many of solar and then this size of the battery. Till 1.5 to 2 years back, I think one problem statement which most of the developers were trying to solve was to minimize the battery or defer the battery, right? Because battery capex was so high, which from one perspective was seen as non-generating asset block, right? So that used to become kind of only the cost to deliver what you need to deliver. Now, with battery cost going down, that problem statement, or rather the objective statement is changing a little bit, which basically means people are trying to still see how much wind versus how much battery. Because solar, as we all know, as of now is the lowest LCOE technology, but it has its own limitations. So it becomes an objective function where you solve wind versus battery sizing and issues of battery sizing and life also. Because battery is the only technology piece or asset block out of the 3 blocks which will need replacement or augmentation. All others will be matching the PPA life versus asset life. So these are some of the things, but all I want to say as a summary is this is not just cost optimization exercise. This is actually risk assessment also. This is basically underwriting. I'll not say insurance, but underwriting some warranty obligation where you need to take a lot of considerations into mind, and there is no single or no right solution. It depends on team's comfort. And another piece is the ease of execution. There is nothing called easy in execution, but a relative ease of execution and ease of operations, right? That also needs to be taken into account here.
Got it. So it is multiple pieces you're trying to solve at a given time, and different people will have different.
And that makes it interesting. There are risks, but there are upside opportunities also. So
Right.
it is becoming a real design and engineering problem, as well as a financial optimization problem together, going hand in hand. So this is much more interesting, exciting, and challenging vis-a-vis single technology projects.
And that explains what Mr. Sudeep mentioned. There are better ROEs, but there are higher risks as well of these. I'll go to Mr. Dhar next. Rohitji, we're also seeing a very rapid expansion in manufacturing capacity in India. Both incumbent module manufacturers expanding their capacities, people are moving upstream into cell manufacturing. From a financing perspective now, what are some of the key criteria or sort of key issues that lenders are assessing when they want to finance, or when you go to raise finance for your manufacturing plants?
Yeah, there is most certainly an upsurge in manufacturing activity, and which has been enabled by the policy interventions that have been made in recent past. So from lender perspective, there are certain basics that they look at. They obviously look at the financial statement, current financial statement of the entity, organization which is embarking on further investment or expansion. They also look at the technology, what technology. Nowadays, lenders also have their technical cells or advisors. So, now regarding solar, there's a fair bit of proliferation of understanding, of knowledge. It is not like what used to be in the past. Very few knew what the subject was. So, another factor in solar is that technology is ever changing. Unlike many other sectors where technology is stable or there's not much innovation happening, solar is something which keeps all of us on toes. I mean, every quarter there's something new happening, or even I would say a quarter is also too less a time. So constant change, and constant change can be a positive disruption, but a disruption nonetheless, and it has to be managed. And you need, on the manufacturing side, the knowledge, ability, and skills to handle those kind of changes that take place. So lenders obviously look at the technology part, and then they look at the demand side, because any capacity expansion in any sector, there has to be a demand assessment. Is the demand going to be sustainable? Is the momentum going to sustain? Also, the lenders look at regulatory policy framework, because that plays a very important role in solar manufacturing. In fact, the current upsurge of activity in manufacturing in India is driven as a result of the policy interventions. So obviously they look at that. And then the management team, the track record, So all these factors get into this assessment.
Right. I'm going to take a little bit of a detour while sticking to this topic of manufacturing. I'm going to go to Amitji now. Wari will soon start production in its US factory. In fact, one of the few companies globally who has managed to start manufacturing in the US under the IRA for solar. If you could share with us what were the one or two sort of challenges or unexpected barriers along the way, and how did you manage to overcome those?
No, it's a great question. And we actually stumbled upon challenges which we thought we would never actually stumble upon in a developed nation, right? One of the things that we stumbled upon was availability of power in Texas. And we are actually in Houston, in a suburb of Houston called Brookshire. So one would never imagine availability of power can be an issue, but that was. And so what we realized is that things take, so we often criticize India for the speed of implementation and going fast and so on and so forth. We realized that, we actually had to jump through many more hoops to get the power to the factory than we would have otherwise done, maybe, let's say, in a state like Gujarat. So that was a surprise. Other than that, honestly, everything was fairly range bound. Many people and many of the other industry peers kind of keep saying, were you able to keep up to the budgets and the costs that were, because that, people feel that you will actually, face a googly from that perspective. Our experiences actually has been, if you reasonably plan well, you can pretty much anticipate all the kind of costs that you have. You need to have the right local team. That's the most important. People who have actually been in the United States for a very long period of time and actually have built factories in the United States. You cannot use the yardstick in India and then try to start building stuff in the United States. That's going to be a recipe for failure and potentially disaster. And even more so, China. Sometimes what happens is that we take Chinese yardsticks. It's not going to work at all. And I think if you take those into cognizance, it's a pretty deterministic process where you will be able to land reasonably on your budget, give or take a little bit, but within the limits of what you have set for yourself.
So horses for courses, but one big surprise that you didn't expect to turn up in Texas.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Similar sort of topic around, promotion of manufacturing. I'll go to Rohitji now. Federally, we have a lot of support for manufacturing. We have the PLI, we have some trade barriers in place. What support, are state and local governments offering to promote domestic manufacturing? Or what do you think can be realistically and should be offered by local entities to promote domestic solar manufacturing in India?
Yeah, sure. India definitely, power is a concurrent subject, so state governments do play a role. But before getting into answering your question, I would also like to emphasize what a manufacturer like MV has done. In recent times, we have become the first Indian module manufacturer ever to have, in PVL California reliability testing, all 7 critical metrics of the modules. We have emerged as a top performing module, which is first time any Indian company has achieved. So there's, why I said this ahead of answering your question is there's a lot that a proactive manufacturer can achieve. And this achievement has attracted global recognition. And with it also, the premium customers are willing to pay a premium for the product. And so this is something which enables, and even the policy makers are influenced by these achievements of Indian manufacturers. So state governments can definitely do a lot in terms of producing trouble-free, providing trouble-free, hassle-free infrastructure, land, facilitation. Recently MB has launched its 2.5 gigawatt TOPCon cell manufacturing facility, and it consumes a lot of power. There's a lot of power that is required. So when I say infrastructure, that includes land, that includes reliable 24/7 digitally quality of power. And it should be, since it goes for a green product, it should be given at a lesser tariff to encourage the green. So then state governments, there are various approvals which are given. There could be a single window for that. And they could even have local subsidies of some form in addition to what is given centrally. So state governments definitely have a lot to gain by providing this, because ultimately investment means job creation and revenue for the state as well. So that has to kick in.
Rohit, if you don't mind, I would like to also add a
Yeah.
little bit to that. So, I want to deconstruct the mission that we collectively should be on. I mean, whether it's manufacture, the entire renewable industry. We talked about the complexity of projects. Renewable, solar is almost being treated as a straight-jacketed, simple thing. You go best LCOE, go and do. Of course, it can't do much on its own. So you need to have many other elements come together, and therefore projects are getting complex and so on and so forth. So what is the mission? The mission is 500 gigawatts by 2030, right? And then we just, in our earlier panel, we talked about the fact that it's actually not 500, it is potentially 700 odd, right? When you get in all elements of hydrogen and all of that, which is good and bad. Good is that it is good for everybody, it's business for everybody. I would not say bad. Let's understand the challenge in there. At 500 gigawatts itself, 5.5 years left. We need to do 55 to 60 gigawatts of renewable per year. And 35 to 40 gigawatts has to be solar, right, in that. I don't know if all stakeholders, including government and state, have grappled with that magnitude of that number. I don't know if some of us run marathons. I try to do it in 2 hours time, half marathon. And it's a tough thing for me. I sometimes am 30 seconds ahead, 1 minute ahead, or sometimes I go on that side. And so the reason why I'm saying this is it's a marathon, but there is a serious timing there. And so you have to run at a serious speed and run that marathon. And for that, the contribution of states have to be very high. What are the contribution of states? If you go to a state and you say that you need this much of land and it's allocated to you, when you go there should not be any teething issues. And there are these teething issues you don't get, and then 3-4 months go in managing those teething issues. Then you need a lot of power. Okay, how quickly can you get that power at the right price point? We talked about the price of that. And plus, we would like to actually do a lot of renewable in that itself, right? Because we would like to have our carbon footprint to the lowest. So therefore, we would like to do renewable. In that, being cognizant about the fact that wheeling charges, transmission charges, and all of that actually add on to the burden overall and make it difficult. And finally, creating, a cohesive, nice environment where locals are also getting jobs, they are being trained, and everybody working together, keeping in mind the speed at which we need to execute. So we'll have to, I guess, increase our execution speed by almost 3 to 5 times. And I feel we are painfully slow. Painfully slow.
On the same thread, I just wanted to add here, since we are discussing a holistic picture and speed needs to ramp up, I think what also needs to come in very strongly is indigenous development of technology, spend on R&D. You see, today the solar machinery, very little of it is produced in-house. I'm talking of the machine tools. There was a time when it used to be sourced for Europe. Of course, MV has still sourced its cell plant from Germany, with Fraunhofer as the knowledge partner. But there's no ecosystem, there's no policy incentive which incentivizes this. And unless there is R&D spent, if we look at how the Chinese developed the solar inverter, 2010-11 when we started in India, there was no Chinese solar inverter. It was all German makes, Italian makes, European makes. So 10 years, they spent 5-6 years. They invested in technology, funded it, incubated the technology in their research institutes, and then they proliferated the technology. With the result, we see now today the Chinese inverter manufacturers, they have the market share. So technology is something, I don't know, when I was a student, I passed out of my college, I used to have that perception that not enough happening on R&D, not enough happening on technology incubation. And today, after so many decades, I still have the same perception. I don't know what is it in Indian culture that makes us technology averse. I mean, otherwise, we are a great people. But so that needs to be corrected.
It's not a solar only problem. The R&D push is a problem across many sectors. But I'm going to stick to this sort of theme of solar manufacturers and how it has really sprung up. My question is to Sudeep ji. The last time I counted, there were about 82 different solar manufacturers in the ALMM, or what is the official list that the government recognizes. And many of them are relatively new companies, relatively small companies, even in the Indian context. How do you see this evolving over the next 3 to 5 years? Do you see some sort of consolidation? Do you see specialization? Do you see even more entrants coming into this market? What can we expect over the next 3, 4, 5 years?
Yeah, interesting question. So, over the last few years, as you know, we have moved away from globalization to more inward-looking. Every country has done that, right? But in spite of that, I think we are still today very, very affected by whatever is happening in other parts of the world. And as you're aware, in China, there is a lot of stuff which is happening, right? From a stimulus to lowering of rates, etc., right? So the first thing that we've got to recognize is that we may have our own policies, but we are not really insulated from whatever happens globally, right? Therefore, in the context of solar, we have to take into account, the fact that over the last 2 years, how prices have fallen, capital costs have fallen, right? And at the same time, given the policies of the government in terms of having to sort of look at Indian manufacturing in a big way and the PLI, etc., one at the end of the day has to compete, right? Because if one doesn't effectively compete, then one is out of the picture, right? So if you look at the way, a module-only manufacturer has costs compared to one step backward into cell and then one step backward into wafer, a lot of the Indian manufacturers will have to eventually do that, right? And I say that because the capital costs have also fallen, right? So relatively more easier compared to a year back, say. That is one. Second is that when you look at the level of competition in the industry, right? Even a 1 cent per watt is going to make a big difference, right? Now, if you want to get into things like green hydrogen, you want to get into things like, the complexity that we just, talked about, all that will make a difference, right? So at the end of the day, it is going to be, I think, sort of a quote-unquote big boys game, right? A lot of backward integration will happen. I believe the government will incentivize domestic manufacturing, continue to incentivize domestic manufacturing. And at the end of the day, there is also an export opportunity, even though it may be short-lived, but that opportunity will still be there. And I think players are gearing up for it. We looked at, how people have raised equity. A lot of the international, funds are coming in and eyeing India, right? So financing, I don't think is going to be that much of a challenge. I think the challenge is going to be how quickly you are able to backwardly integrate, how quickly you are able to take charge of technology and come to terms with it, and effectively compete. I think that is the key, effectively compete.
You mentioned the export opportunity. I'll come back to that. But before that, I have a question for Naveen ji. We have been talking of this sort of challenge on the supply chain side. On solar modules, it's essentially now having to procure from a different set of players than what people were typically procuring from in the past. On the wind side as well, we have had European OEMs sort of really not play in the picture anymore. So for companies or IPPs that do not have in-house manufacturing, what are some of the ways in which supply chain risk is getting managed or procurement is getting de-risked? What strategies are IPPs adopting in this now?
So Rohit, answer to this from my side is going to be absolutely reverse. We know what we are and what we are supposed to do. We are a developer, and we don't see being aligned to one technology or in-house sourcing of equipment as one of the strength areas. No, I would put it other way around. We need to have the flexibility and nimbleness to choose what is best at that point in time for that product or project, right? So not having backward integration of supply chain is a strength to me, not a weakness, number one, very clear. Because we are a developer, right? And not playing integrated game. But another point is on the larger supply chain issue perspective, I think, and which goes to previous comments made by both Amit and Mr. Sural is 2030 is a target, a deadline, but I think we are trying to marry multiple conflicting objectives here, and that's where a little bit more clarity of thought would be highly recommended, because on one side we have 2030 targets, on the other side we want to do as much self-reliance or Atmanirbharta as possible. On the third side, we must not forget we are building assets for minimum 25 years, maybe 35 years. So asset quality, getting technology right, getting projects right, getting them, ensuring that we are doing right thing for the country's energy security is equally important. So developers like us who have the DNA of discipline, I think the process of development and process of putting together projects can't, it has to be expedited on one side, I agree, but there are no shortcuts, right? You need to do right thing. If it takes time, it will take time. The slightly different way of doing that is, are we setting the house in order? Are we putting enough enablers? So even if we do 25, 30 and 35 gigawatts for next 2-3 years, can we pick up the pace in 28, 29 and 30 to do 65 gigawatts per year?
Let me ask you a direct question, since you mentioned taking a holistic view. The government has proposed sort of ALMM-like policy for cells now. There is a draft and it wants to do that. In your opinion, then, what is the right time? When should government move towards more protection upstream or more localization push upstream as well? Given all the things that you mentioned about, having things in place before you run, making sure that your target is in mind, but your pieces are also, puzzle are also properly done.
So this is very sensitive question, so I'll not put a date to it.
No, not a
What
date.
is the right
What should we look at?
I think we should be first developing the ecosystem through various interventions, be it PLI being one, and maybe X number of gigawatts of deployment second, and maybe going one step back. Today we are talking about cell, while for last 3-4 years we were focusing on modules. Had we focused on cells a little bit earlier, then I think people would have made their business plans slightly differently, right? So, and this goes back to the discussion which was happening in the previous panel, the prioritization and the manufacturing with what objective? Manufacturing to support developers can't be the objective. Whether manufacturing is there to develop manufacturing ecosystem or job creation or supply chain security. Once we prioritize these three things, solve these three things, then I think we all are here for domestic manufacturing, but not domestic assembly only, right? And artificial kind of roadblocks or let's say restrictions, which are going to cost the economy some way or the other. So without getting into timeline, whether 2 years is the right timeline or 3 years is the right timeline, let's talk about that R&D thing which Mr. Rohit was talking about. But the problem with India is why we don't spend on R&D is we don't have that kind of capital formation, right? To fund R&D, you need profits, you need balance sheet sizes, which India is yet to achieve. So how can we achieve that faster and better? I think that could also be one of the objectives. How to increase corporates' R&D spending power, or government does it. Currently, neither of the sources doing it. Neither public is spending on R&D enough, nor private. Now, private would need capital formation and profits to fund it. Okay, how can we do that? I think that will be the right timing, whether it takes 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. And last point is the catch-up game of even if you go to cells, which cell lines are you going to put up? The cell lines, if you are thinking I'll put up what China put 3 years back, then by the time you put it up, I think they would have moved on to the next thing. Now, would we be in a healthy position then? I think is equally important question.
Maybe I'll put that question to Rohit ji. We have sort of talked of R&D as being one challenge. Naveen ji just mentioned the pace of technology change is something that is also a challenge for everyone in this ecosystem. For incumbent Indian manufacturers who want to move upstream from making modules now to cells and thinking about wafers, how can one address these one or two big challenges? What are the ways in which the ecosystem can sort of mitigate these problems or solve these problems?
Yeah, there has to be proactive policy making, and public spending will play a key role, especially in energy transition. We have to, first of all, recognize and understand that energy transition poses a strategic opportunity for India. Our per capita power consumption is much lower than China. I guess it's around 1/3, and it would be less than even 1/10 of what United States per capita power consumption is. So with that kind of asymmetry, there is tremendous scope and potential for growth in energy consumption. And that is, in a way, strategic opportunity because we can add carbon-free energy. So we should avoid the trap as a nation of getting into only being energy of consumers, something what we experienced in telecom. When telecom revolution happened in India and we have more than 7 lakh plus cell towers, we never manufactured a single BTS, we were importing all the time. So therefore, this focus and objective to manufacture has definitely to be there, because then we create jobs. And the public spending through policy making has to come in on R&D, on research institutes. There's a lot of deficiency of trained manpower in India in solar. These frequent changes, wafer size changes, number of bus bars is constantly going up. So everybody is figuring it out. It's always, we are already always in India playing catch up and trying to get on these changes which happen in the supply chain and product specifications. So what I would suggest principally a policy initiative from government which incentivizes public spending of R&D and technology be incubated, and then it can be offered to industry. That is what will work in Indian context. That is what I feel. And the point that Naveen ji made is a very pertinent one, the one especially on the cell line. That was our thought process also, because projects take time, evaluation. By the time you are evaluating, you write a DPR and you get the financial closure, and you might feel that the bird has flown, that it's already obsolete. So that's a very real challenge in solar manufacturing side. A disruption happening too early, and it has not bottomed out. Today in terms of cell efficiency, we are very close to quantum limit of cell efficiency. Just as in thermal energy conversion, the efficiency limit is theoretically governed by Carnot cycle. In solar PV, it is governed by the quantum limit. So already we are at quantum limit, but that's not going to be the end of innovation, because there is so much which can be done on the PV side. So that's my take on it.
I'm going to sort of move away a little bit from this discussion on, future innovation on technology, and sort of move back a little bit to projects and procurement and supply chain. I want to turn to Amit ji. Waaree has been one of the few companies that has done well in the export market, particularly to the US. Now, how are the requirements or sort of procurement practices of US buyers different? Are they different from how it is done in India? And the second part to this is, if you had a free hand, or in an ideal world, how would you like Indian IPPs to do their procurement with you?
Okay, great. I'm going to take the second question first, and then I'll answer the second one. Before I do that, I think what Naveen said, it's a complex problem. I mean, if I just throw my hat of manufacturing away and look at it as somebody who needs to balance out both manufacturing and this, it's a complex problem. And it's a complex problem because, like Naveen ji said, you need to have an asset which is going to have a lifetime of 25 to 30. Now, one might argue, MV, we just heard, is very high quality. Wari has accolades with Bloomberg NEF, with RETC. So one can say that, okay, worldwide, whatever is your standard, I'm at that level. That's an argument. The other issue is technology, and I don't want to drag the situation in technology. The reason why I'm saying that is because it's all connected in the way in which IPPs are thinking, right? Monoperk had a span of Monoperk had a span of 3 years, 3.5 years. Topcon will have 1, 2, 3, 4 waves, and we are very close to Shockley-Kaiser limit of 32% of cell efficiency. There will be some advantage of HJT, but little bit. So these things will keep changing. IPPs are rightly worried about that. And BrightNight, of course, is a IPP on both sides of the fence. We have them in United States, we have them in India, we have them in everywhere. So there are these companies which are not going to be very different in their buying pattern, and these are the very issues that they'll be thinking through in their mind. So quality, do you have the right quality? How quickly can you have the bankability? If I go to the lenders and say that this is what it is, will the lenders actually give money? And so those are the things which are very common. Where we find the difference is an overall approach where there can be a premium associated with, let us say, if you are investing in technology, if you are investing in that piece of equipment which is give you an extra set of eyes and ears, lend intelligence, artificial intelligence on your line, which is going to enhance the quality, and therefore longevity, who is going to give a premium, for instance, if I'm manufacturing in the United States. So those are some of the things which are clearly prevalent in United States in particular. And the other thing which is prevalent is once you are done, you are done. Things are not negotiated, renegotiated, and you don't go 10,000 times, and it's an easy business. Once you do that, it's tough to get in, but once you are in, it's an easy business. You'll get money and time. You don't have to follow up, and all of those kind of things. So those are the good things about that. I mean, upfront there's a lot more work and convincing. In IPPs in India, we do find, again, it's cutthroat, right? Because everybody is competing in this crazy world where you need to get to that number which is going to win the bid or whatever it is, and when that is in, then you're going to impose all of those to all your vendors. You're going to impose all of those. It's a tough quagmire to be in, and we'll have to together solve it. So in an ideal world, yeah, there are these characteristics. I mean, if BrightNight India thinks the same way as BrightNight US in terms of technology, कि भाई इन लोग ने इतना invest किया है, this much of or I have put a artificial intelligence in my line, which costs money. It doesn't come for free. That quality doesn't come for free. So let's give them a little bit of a premium. That's utopia, but that's not going to happen.
He made a pitch to Naveen ji, but okay. We have time for 2 last questions, and then we'll open up to the audience. I want to turn to Sudeep ji on this. Our panel has mentioned, and there is a lot of discussion at REI about, green hydrogen and what is the potential for scaling up of renewables because of sort of these new uses of renewables in India. Now, as a lender, what are sort of the key milestones, or sort of what is the criteria what is it that you're looking out for before you think financing of these will ease out in India? What is it that the banks really need to see happen in the country?
So, if you just look at any green hydrogen project, there is the RE part of it, and then there is the electrolyzer part of it, right? The RE part of it has got 25-year life. Electrolyzer has got a shorter life. So whatever financing is done, you have to ensure that your revenues and profits are able to cover, that kind of a capital cost, right? So the problem, of course, is that given the costs of green hydrogen today, which is much higher than gray hydrogen, and it does not find usage in the normal course of the normal course of many industries, whether it's fertilizers or refineries, you need to create a consumption obligation, right? So because without a consumption obligation, if you put up a green hydrogen plant today, and you know that this is going to fare out hydrogen at a much higher cost than a plant which comes up, let's say, 2 years down the line, right? So the first plant has to be protected, otherwise you will have bankruptcy all over the place. So therefore, you need to have consumption obligations which are backed by contracts. Easier said than done, because then you need to have green hydrogen as a pass-through in complex fertilizers, the cost of complex fertilizers, which is not there today. You need to have similarly on the refinery side. So banks will typically look at long-term offtake contracts. They will look at long-term offtake contracts which are backed by consumption obligations, which in turn are backed by policies. Because at the end of the day, fertilizers or refineries have to have policies. Otherwise, what will happen is that 3 years down the line, people are going to renege contracts. As soon as they learn that the hydrogen is available at lower cost, why will they take from the first plant? So I think that's the thing which is critical. The rest of the things will follow. I mean, once you have consumption obligations and long-term contracts, I think the ecosystem will, settle itself. And I think the example which comes to my mind is solar. I mean, 10 years back, 15 years back, it was backed by, long-term PPAs, right? So the equivalence of that has to find its way here somewhere. And of course, the export market also similar things, right? Coming back to contracts. So that's what pretty much I think, and that's going to be the challenge. The rest of the things are going to probably solve itself.
Sure. My last question to Naveen ji on the financing side of it, and more particularly on the debt side of it, we have talked of the larger picture. Let's come now to what we are immediately seeing for the next 6 to 12 months. Central banks around the world, including India, are expected to cut rates or have already started cutting rates, which is great for developers. How much of an impact will that have in terms of increasing the attractiveness, availability of debt for Indian IPPs? And what do you see happening over the next, say, 12 months in terms of availability of debt capital?
So Rohit, I think answer for this is very simple. Fortunately for Indian project finance market, as Mr. Surur also said, capital has been coming in time, because the way sector was maturing, so was the ability of lenders to appreciate the risk, evaluate the risk and lend. So I think project finance market of India is in very good shape, whether with rate cuts or without rate cuts. Of course, we like the rate cuts because that improves the returns. So I think availability of capital, I think has been there. Little bit of ECB's attractiveness will go up. Otherwise, domestic capital supply was anyway there, enough and more. I think more important question is, apart from availability of capital, is the way I say, entire ecosystem has to progress. Today, with new generation tenders, whether we call them FDREs or RTCs, developer community is progressing, right? What we need or what we expect or what we would want is lenders community and DISCOM community also coming together, so that we can actually deliver those projects. Apart from just winning bids on Excel sheets or on screens, we actually want to deliver these projects, which requires DISCOM's participation as well as lenders' participation actively, apart from few other factors like capacity building and so on and so forth. So I think that would be my take on debt capital, that we need to get more and more lenders on the table who are still seeing renewables as one step brother of larger power system and all that. No, this is the main power sector now. Renewables is the main thing. Other things are actually side tracks. So that's on supply of debt capital. I think things are only looking positive. Supply of debt capital, in fact, even equity capital. India is in very, very good position. As Amit mentioned, we operate across the globe. India is in such a good, compelling investment proposition situation that people have no choice but to come to India and invest. But the onus is on us, the Indian stakeholders, to deliver on the promises, asset quality in time, in cost with compliances.
Thank you so much. We have time to take one or two audience questions. If there are any questions, if you could please raise your hand. And if you could please have the mic passed around. When the microphone comes to you, please state your name and what organization you're from. And most importantly, who the question is directed to. Gentleman in the front. Yeah, thank you.
Very good afternoon, everyone. This is Akash Jain from EY India Debt Markets. Wonderful hearing your thoughts. I have two questions with different parts. One is to the technology disruption. We were talking about poly to mono and now TopCon. Just wanted to understand, like, are we also discussing HJT or any sort of per square feet technology, which is promising to yield much more efficiency? That is one. And second is, again, in terms of financing, what
Akash,
has been...
I'll just request you to keep it to one question so that we
All
can
right.
give everyone else a chance as well. Thank you. Amit ji.
So I'll take a quick stab at it, and of course, you can follow it up. But so you've talked about the trajectory so far, right? But we are at an interesting point from the perspective of efficiency. It's the game of efficiency at the end of the day. And both the technologies, whether it's TopCon or HJT, are knocking at the doors of the, as we talked about, the quantum limit, which is a Shockley-Kaiser limit of 32% for a cell. So TopCon, when it evolves completely, will be around 26.5, 27% of efficiency. And HJT will be in the region of the same, 27, 27.5. Push it maybe a little more than that. But the real jump is going to be a tandem cell, which is you have, that's the intrinsic limitation of the silicon cell, right? 32%. And beyond 27, 28%, you might have interdigitated back contacts, a few other things, which will eke out maybe 0.1, 0.3, 0.4 percentage points of efficiency. But the real jump is, if I have a cell which is sitting on top of the silicon cell, and both are actually exploiting different spectrum, different parts of the solar spectrum that is coming in. And that's where perovskite comes in. That's where some other technologies will come in. And we believe that perovskite is actually going to be the next game changer. Is it going to happen in the next 6 months? Probably no. Is it going to happen in the next 3 years? Certainly yes. So somewhere in that time span, it'll definitely come up. And manufacturers have to be ready for that. So typically what we do is, in Waaree, we depreciate the equipment which is actually going to manufacture, whether it's a cell line, so cell line, it's slightly different, but the module lines, we depreciate it in 3 years' time. Knowing fully well that the next one is coming. So you depreciate it, you take it out, and then you're ready for the next one. The same goes for the cell.
Perfect, thank you.
Gentleman in the jacket, yes, sir.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my name is Dr. Harsh Sethi. I'm from Trinano. We work with NCPRE and IIT Bombay. My question is that I know HDFC does support a lot of technology companies, but in the climate sector, the technology and R&D innovation requires a lot of capital, a lot of investments in R&D. So government has mandated that CSR becomes a part of percentage of your turnover. What about ESG? What are your thoughts? Should ESG be made compulsory by corporates to invest in and have a percentage of R&D in that so that climate and sustainability can grow up? Thank you.
So, as you're aware, government is taking steps for larger corporates to follow ESG guidelines. And if you look at it, the top 500 corporates, there are SEBI guidelines which are asking for more and more disclosures. So as with any other sector, this is going to be like a journey. The larger corporates will first have to start disclosing. Then they will have to look at policy measures so we'll have to have policies in place by the large corporates to ensure that they are ESG compliant. And the final thing is going to be when ESG actually becomes a tool for corporate strategy, right? So we are a little bit away from that. Once we go down this path, then what will happen is that the ecosystem which supplies to the larger corporates will see merit in having a lot of not only disclosures but policy measures. They'll start measuring where they're going wrong, right? As of now, perhaps only the top 50, 75 corporates are maybe measuring, right? So it's a journey. It's good that we have begun the journey, but obviously long way to go.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a very good panel discussion, and I'm sure there is lots of things that you have taken away. If I may just summarize one truth that I got out from each panelist, Amitji told us about how Texas has an issue with power supply that he did not expect. Naveenji told us about how, not doing backward integration for a developer is a strength, not a weakness. Sudeepji told us how the hydrogen ecosystem will settle itself when consumption obligations come in. And Rohitji has seen this lack of R&D as a long-standing issue for many decades, and it continues to be an issue. So we hope that that settles itself down. Thank you so much. I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I have. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists for the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, moderator of the session. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a session about navigating the speed bumps on India's clean power journey. Once again, a huge round of applause for our panelists, for them to be sharing their information, and thank you so much for participating so well. May we request the moderator of the session to kindly present a memento to our panelists and thank them. May I request you, Mr. Rohit Gajre, to kindly present a memento to Mr. Rohit Thar. A big thank you to Mr. Sudeep. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing this valuable information with us. We now present a memento to Mr. Naveen Khandelwal. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And may we now present a memento to Mr. Amit Paithankar. Ladies and gentlemen, we can bring in some energy into this room.